Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Leading People Through Continuous Change. I'm Kevin Iguano, and I'll be your moderator for today. Today's presenter is Carolynne Wintrip. I've known Carolynne now for a couple of years. Carolynne is a senior facilitator and learning consultant with TidalShift. She has extensive experience in leadership development, learning solution design, performance consulting, change management, strategic planning, facilitation. She's a great all-around instructor. Her education includes a Bachelor of Applied Science, an MBA. She's a certified team performance coach. She also has a certified personal resilience practitioner and others. Carolynne's one of our top instructors for this topic today, and I'm really excited to welcome her. Carolynne, thank you. Welcome to joining the call.
Okay, thanks so much, Kevin. Yes, I'm really delighted to be here with everyone today because I'm speaking about a topic that's really very near and dear to my heart. I think most of my career has been spent helping to both lead and navigate people through change. And so I guess I grew up in healthcare and higher education, and have had the opportunity to hold senior leadership roles in those sectors. And now over the last 10 or so years, I've been working as a consultant with companies in a whole range of sectors. And so it would be major retail, healthcare, financial services, insurance, technology, manufacturing, public sector, government, lots of different types of organizations. And a common denominator for all of them is that they're trying to get better at navigating through and leading people through change. And so in today's webinar, I'll be drawing on some of the learnings and some of the work that we do with clients around helping people to get better at change.
Excellent. Before we get too far into it, we have a few logistical things I'd like to cover for the audience.
Okay.
Carolynne will be starting her presentation momentarily. During the presentation, all the attendees will be muted. If you have a question during the presentation, there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions, but so you don't forget the question along the way, you're welcome to type them into the questions window or the questions panel in our web interface. So you don't forget them, just type them as you go so they don't get lost. And at the end, I will either read them out or give you an opportunity to unmute your line and ask the question verbally. And therefore we can get the questions answered by Carolynne at the end of the presentation. This presentation is eligible for continuing education or professional development credits for through various different certifications and professions. Details will be posted to all the attendees at the end of the call. This presentation is also being recorded, and the resulting video recording will be posted on YouTube. Carolynne, begin.
Okay, thanks so much, Kevin. So here's some things that we'll explore together today in this webinar. I mean, when you think of the topic of change, there's so many different aspects to being successful at leading and moving organizations through change. So today we'll look at a few pieces of this puzzle. We'll talk a little bit about what are today's change realities for you and for your organization. We'll look at some of the skills that are important for individuals to have and to develop in order to really both survive and thrive and get excited by change. We'll also take a look at just how we can best lead both ourselves and each other through this environment of continuous change. And I'm hopeful that by the end of the session, you will have been equipped with some ideas for some potential next steps for you. Because at the end of the day, all change is about individuals doing things differently, adopting new behaviors, and doing so with commitment. So where they feel a confidence and a willingness to really move into the change. So today's going to be about that. How do we get from where we are today when it comes to change to where we want to be? So, you know, as I think about change, I'm sometimes reminded of this idea that comes from way back, and I may be dating myself with Goldilocks and the Three Bears being one of my favorite stories, but the key thing that I remember from it is this whole idea of, is it too much, too little, or just right? And when I talk to people in organizations about the levels of change that are happening in their companies today, unfortunately, many are starting to feel a little bit of this too much idea. And they're feeling a little overwhelmed. I recall one client I was working with a couple of years ago. It was a new CEO who had come on board, and they had, you know, redeveloped the strategic plan, and they had for the year 80 strategic priorities. And this was a company of 300 to 400 people, so not a huge, you know, multinational. So people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, I think, at times with the degree of change that they may be facing in their roles, in their teams, and in their organizations. So if you stop to think just for your own organization right now, do you think most people would be saying, oh, it's too much? Or might they be saying it's too little? We need to change faster. How are you feeling about change in your own organization? So when we think about the types of changes that could be going on for you, I've put on the screen a list of several different kinds of change. And I invite you to scan this list. Take a look at the different types of changes that could be going on for you and for others within your organization. As you look at this, think about how many are either things that you've had to adapt to perhaps over the last 3 to 6 months, or maybe things that are coming soon. Maybe you're reporting to a new boss. Perhaps you and your department and another has merged, and you now have to relook at how you get the work done. Or maybe there's been downsizing related to your area of the business. Regardless of which of these kinds of changes you and your organization might be facing, the reality of change and changes is that it takes energy. It takes us energy to adapt and takes us energy to navigate through to get to the other side of what is the new normal going to look like for us. And so there's a really good chance, I know when I talk to people in workshops about this list, most of them are saying it's been at least 5 of these within the last 3 to 6 months. So it's change upon change upon change. And that's the new reality of today's work world. And so you add on top of that, we also all, of course, have individual lives outside of our work. And there's a very good chance that we may be navigating through some changes there as well. And depending who we are, the numbers of changes that we've experienced over our careers, you know, the way in which we approach change can be impacted by all of that. So the very same change can impact each of us slightly differently, or sometimes significantly differently, depending on who we are and what our patterns and habits and ways of thinking about change are. So the good news about all of this and the fact that there's so many changes taking place in many organizations is that every time we face another change, it provides us with the opportunity to get better at it. And, you know, I think that's a little bit of my eternal optimism coming through, but I also truly believe it, that the more we go through change, the better we get at adapting. So the Red Queen effect, I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it, but it's a term that is used by biologists to describe the evolutionary need of organisms to evolve, to continue to evolve faster than those competing for the resources. And so as I look at this quote that came from Lewis Carroll in Through the Looking Glass, it came from the Red Queen character in the story. And she said it takes all the running we can do to stay in the same place. And if we want to get somewhere else, we have to run at least twice as fast as that. So I think this resonates for how it feels sometimes in organizations today. And so the better we can be as individuals at coping with and thriving through change, the more successful we'll be as organizations in making the adaptations that might be required by our environment. And so I'm sure many of you have heard the term VUCA. And so VUCA is about the world we're living in here today. It's about the fact that there's a lot of volatility, turbulence. The speed of change is increasing. There's more and more uncertainty, and our confidence in our ability to predict the future is perhaps not as great as what it might have been in the past. It's hard to be able to look out too far into the future because of the degree of uncertainty and the pace of change and the capabilities that are arising based on technology and new entrants into our industries. There's a lot of complexity in our world as well. Obviously, we're in a global economy. Many of the decisions that we are making in our organizations are impacted by a whole range of different factors, and there's a complexity and an interconnectedness that can make decision making and strategy a little more challenging today. And then, of course, the ambiguity. Many times, you know, we announce a change and we begin the process of a change, but aspects of it remain foggy. We still need to act with that fogginess, that fuzziness, that uncertainty, and incomplete information in many cases. So this is our world. And so, you know, it's important that we continue to take care of ourselves in a world like this and find ways to make sure that our days, too many of our days, don't feel too much like this. So the question becomes, how do we stay sane and productive and help others stay sane and productive in a world or a day or a week or a month that sometimes feels like this? It feels like we're on this ride without a way to get off, and we want to have fun on the ride. We want to survive and we want to do well. And so I think a part of a key to that is around how do we build our resilience? How do we continuously build our resilience so that we can feel confident and comfortable during this time of continuous change? And so resilience is looking change in the face and giving it this sign. It's that feeling of confidence and competence, this ability to deal with the ambiguity and still feel some sense of control within it. Still feel like we are on some stable ground and that we've got this, we're going to do okay with it. So one of the things that I do in my work with organizations is I help people to both discover and understand what some of their key strengths are already when it comes to resilience, and help them as well to set in place a plan and some strategies and tactics for how they can continue to build that resilience. So when you think about the word resilience, or you think about the concept of resilience, how would you define it in your own words? Think about that for a minute. What does it really mean to you? What is resilience? So as you ponder that, I'm going to offer up a definition that I think helps to capture both what it is as well as some of what it looks like. So at the end of the day, resilience is about our ability to really deal effectively with high levels of challenge and potentially change. We can substitute that word change for the word challenge, as well as disruption, and at the same time stay effective and productive and well and not burnt out. So it's our ability to keep coping and keep actually doing well, both in terms of our own state of mind and effectiveness, as well as in terms of the outcomes that the organization needs from us. So some of what that looks like is if we're looking at someone and we think of this person as someone who's really got high resilience, this is the individual who's okay with high levels of ambiguity. A person who suddenly they're thrown off with some brand new information or a brand new expectation, and they quickly figure out how they're going to get that done. How are they going to accommodate that new need they weren't aware of? It's also an ability to not just survive, but to actually thrive in that environment of adversity. So to be energized by change. And of course, to bounce back when things don't go well. So to be able to take the learning from that, to be able to look at what the benefit of having gone through that might have been, and to really use whatever challenges or changes that we might be facing to get better at change and to increase our ability to navigate it. And to me, it really comes down to, at the end of the day, some of our habits and patterns. We all have ways of looking at the world. We have ways of accomplishing the tasks that we're required to do in our roles. And we also have ways of thinking and responding during times of change. And so for some of us, during times of stability, we might be very methodical in our approach. We might be very creative in our approach. But then suddenly there's there's something really uncertain that happens for us. So maybe we've just been told that we're having a new boss starting next week, and the team is going to be reorganized over the coming 3 months. And so we've just heard this news, and then how do you start thinking? So it's not about the times of stability. Resilience is about the times when there are either unmet expectations or disrupted expectations. And what are our habits and patterns then? How do we look at the world then? How do we look at our place in the world then? So I'm going to talk about 7 different approaches or characteristics or action areas that together make up resilience. So, resilience can feel like a large term, and it's one of those things we kind of know it when we see it, but I feel by breaking it down into more specific, concrete areas of action that we can consider, it really equips us to better understand what our current strengths are, as well as what we might want to improve upon within our own approaches. So the 7 characteristics of resilience that I'll be talking about come from Resilience Alliance, which is a partner organization that we work with, and I'm certified with Resilience Alliance as a resilience practitioner. So the actual work of this came from Linda Hoops through Resilience Alliance. And at the end of the webinar, I'll be sharing the name of Linda's book. It's based on more than 20 years of research, and all around how do both organizations and individuals and teams move their way successfully through change and adversity. And so I'll be sharing with you these 7 resilience skills and characteristics. And as I go through each one, I'd love you to be thinking for yourself, maybe giving yourself a score, if you will, between 1 and 10. So think about when you suddenly have something unexpected happen for you, what are the things that you most naturally do first? You would give yourself a 10 on that, or maybe a 7 or 8. And if it's something that you don't necessarily do quite as comfortably or readily, it maybe takes some more energy for you to do it, then score yourself lower on that one. So, you know, you're suddenly hearing about something that is unexpected to you, and you now need to adapt to it. That's the kind of mind frame I want you to bring to this. So resilience, as I've said, isn't one quality. It is several different ways and choices that we have in terms of how we both think about and respond to change. So the first one of these 7 is positivity. So positivity is our tendency to look for and see possibilities and hope in a challenging situation or an impending change. So when we first hear about change, do we have a tendency to begin to see what's possible, to begin to see the opportunities? Do we look for, you know, the glass half full part of it, or do we use some of our energy to think about what could go wrong during times of change? So if we're on the left side of this continuum of how we use positivity, then we may invest a lot of energy worrying or avoiding the change. We may focus on what could go wrong with it. Whereas if we're on the right side of this continuum, there's a better chance that we're going to be wanting to step into the change because we'll see some of the opportunities and possibilities that come from it. So give yourself a little score on that one. And then let's move to the second one. The second one is confidence. And so this is really how we view our own capabilities and how we see the ability to use our own strengths to face the change and be successful. So those who are lower on the confidence characteristic may hold back and wait for others to tell them what to do in the change. They may be concerned about being judged negatively. If they, you know, they may be worried about failing in the change. And so if we're higher in the confidence characteristic, then we're going to have a realistic awareness of our own strengths, and we'll figure out ways that we can exert some control and some thinking and engagement in the change itself. So I would say both positivity and confidence are part of the fuel of engaging ourselves with change. So with confidence, I would equate that a little bit to this whole idea of a growth mindset as well. So Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset, where people with a growth mindset have a tendency to see setbacks as opportunities to learn, see failure as an opportunity to learn, and realize that we can all continue to improve over time, and that's real positive. The next one is priorities. And so priorities is our tendency to, get really clear early on what's most important for us to use our energy for during time of change. So figuring out the most important things. During times of change, we have lots of different opportunities in terms of what to do. And so with priorities, if we're exercising that muscle, we're clear on the purpose of the change, and we're clear on what our goals are for the change, how we can best spend our energy rather than spinning our wheels. Those lower might have a hard time saying no. They may get sidetracked by distractions or keep shifting their focus and maybe not make as much progress as those who are actively using the priorities approach to navigating through change. So again, give yourself a little score on priorities where you think you might land on that when it comes to a disruptive, challenging situation. The next one's creativity. And so creativity is around how much we have a tendency to try to find the one best way quickly and do that because it's familiar, versus looking at the challenge and coming up with a whole range of different ways we could approach it. And so with creativity, with this muscle, we're going to be more open to coming up with lots of potentially even crazy ideas on how to address it. And our brain will engage really quickly into all the possibilities. So for me, positivity is high and creativity is high. So as soon as a challenge comes my way, I've got 10 or 15 different ideas in terms of how I might approach it. Now I'm a little bit lower on the priorities one. So my potential learning area is how do I make sure that I select the most important ones then and hold myself accountable to those. So have a look at yourself, think about which for you do you think would be, what score rather do you think would be your score when it comes to creativity when dealing with the new, the kind of disruptive change. The next one's connection, and connection is around to what extent do we feel we need to go it alone when faced with a change? Do we retreat? Are we on the left side of this one where we maybe go quiet and try to figure it out ourselves, try to figure out, you know, what can I do for this change, versus on the right side of this one, figuring out, well, what do I need to get me through this change? What resources might I need? What information might I need? Who can I reach out to for support and for help? So connection is an important one as well, like the others, where, you know, oftentimes the answers lie in the whole team versus a few of us trying to sort things out. So connection is our tendency to reach out to others, to draw on support. And that can be a whole range of types of support. It might be practical things, it might even be emotional support, all kinds. So again, give yourself a score. Do you tend to try to do it alone, or do you tend to reach out more to others and ask for the resources that you might need to help you navigate? The second last one is structure. And so structure is our tendency to develop plans and systems to help us get through the change, or to help us get done what needs to get done in order to adapt to the change. So if we're high on this, we'll be good at, and we will naturally use our energy during change to organize time, people, systems, and processes that will support the success of the change. If we're lower, we might be a little more scattered in our approach. We might make it up as we go along. We might not spend enough time getting into the detail of what needs to happen by when. We might not be quite as good at estimating how much time it will take. And so we might not be quite as naturally attuned to how we might need to coordinate the change process with others. So again, think for yourself, is this something that you quite naturally do during times of change? You start the list, you figure out the list. Sometimes structure can work with priorities, but they don't always go hand in hand. Sometimes we can be really good at the structure side and less so at the priorities side. And then the final one is experimenting. So experimenting is our willingness to go ahead and try things in the face of uncertainty. So if we are on the left side of this one and we consider ourselves to perhaps be a little lower on the experimenting characteristic, then we may avoid trying anything until we have the complete plan in place. Whereas someone who's on the right side of this one is going to be more comfortable with doing some little tests of things, trying a few things, taking some calculated risks, and using those risks or experiments to help understand better what ultimately do we want to put in place as the solutions. So it's a willingness to really take action and learn from the action versus spending a lot of time and energy waiting for certainty that may not come. If we think about our VUCA world, you know, there is a need often for us to act with a certain degree of uncertainty and ambiguity. So again, give yourself a bit of a score for that one as well. So as we look at these 7, you can see each of the 7 has a role to play in helping us to understand and take action in the face of change. And so each of them contributes in different ways to our ability to be successful in getting from the point of hearing about a change to actually embracing and committing to it and using our energy toward it. So I invite you to think about, for you, which of these are ones that you would consider to be your superpowers when it comes to change? Which ones just are so natural that you don't even have to think about it? So I'm not thinking about times of stability. I'm thinking about when a change, a sudden change comes your way. Which of them would you say would be your superpowers? And on the flip side of that, which ones do you think you need to strengthen? I mentioned for me, you know, a couple that are particularly high are positivity and creativity. And when I first did my own resilience assessment, I realized that it affirmed something that I already knew, which is that structure and priorities take more energy for me to use. They aren't the ones that come most naturally to me right away. And so the good thing about all of these characteristics is it's not traits that we have that we can't change. They're all learnable. They're all things that we can intentionally choose to get better at and to develop. And as I mentioned earlier, they are also things that, given the fact that we have so many changes many of us are typically facing, there also is a great playground, really, for practice in today's organizations to get better at navigating through these various changes. So so we all have strengths and we all have opportunities when it comes to these resilience characteristics. So I'm going to shift a little bit and talk a bit about, well then, if that's the case, how do we use this awareness to help us help ourselves and help each other during times of continuous change? And so my thinking around this is that it's important that we look at our world as a world of continuous change that really means that for our organization and ourselves to be really successful, we need to ensure that we work toward becoming learning organizations. And so it's that continuous learning, the opportunity that we take to always be looking for how do we get better as an organization and do better as individuals as well. So I'm thinking about how a coaching approach to helping each other through change is something that if we're cultivating that within our organizations, We're in the moment, giving ourselves the opportunity to help ourselves and each other look at our patterns and habits and figure out which of those are possibly really serving us well and which maybe are getting in our way. You know, you look at the outcomes of having a coaching approach. Some of those outcomes are greater awareness around where am I now, and some reflection around where could I be, what might I want to strengthen and improve, setting some intention in terms of how I want to go about that, and then ultimately taking some action and paying attention and generating awareness around the impact of that action again. So it's that continuous cycle of reflection, intention, and action to help us to continue to enhance our approaches to change. So one of the things that we do with the resilience characteristics is we give people an opportunity to get data about where are they now when it comes to resilience. So breaking it down into these 7 different approaches and determining each of them for themselves, where are they now? So that's going to help them to increase that awareness step. More than 100,000 people have completed this profile, and scores come back to people as percentile scores. So we're able to make relative comparisons in terms of how much energy we have for that particular characteristic in comparisons to the others who've completed the profile. And it's designed for development. So it's not about traits that are unchangeable or characteristics where you are what you are and you always will be that. It's designed for development because all of these, as I mentioned, are learnable. And it really is an indication as well when we look at the results of people's profiles as to, you know, what do they most naturally spend their energy on during a time of change. So this is a person who naturally spends their energy on figuring out the priorities and figuring out a system or a plan or a structure that's going to help them to accomplish those priorities. You can see as well in this profile that many of the others are at a midline placement. And a midline placement with a tool like this is still really good. So especially when we look at priorities and structure for this individual being real high in comparison, there's a good chance that they're going to be pretty comfortable overall with change and with navigating through change. We can see as well on a team, we can look at how a particular team may have certain individuals that have strengths in certain areas. And I think, you know, we all recognize that the best teams are the teams that are diverse in their strengths. And so while having diversity on a team can sometimes mean that it's a little more challenging because we're looking at the world in very different ways, the evidence shows us that the end outcomes of a diverse team are much better than a team that has people with the same kind of outlook or the same kind of skills and talents. The other benefit of having teams look at their resilience and determine, you know, what am I strong in versus you, is we have peer coaching available, right? Like we have role models right within our environment to help us learn and develop the things that maybe we are a little less comfortable with or don't do quite as naturally. So in looking at a team like this one, if we were to do a group profile for them, which is another capability we have with this tool, you know, a leader would be able to look at the overall strengths of that particular team and where some of the perhaps highs and lows are for that particular team. And perhaps they could use some of this information to help as far as how they have people work together on certain projects. And so they could use some of the information to kind of create an overall even set of bars on the 7 characteristics by combining a few different people on a particular project. Another thing about having access to information like this is if a person finds in their resilience profile that perhaps they have a tendency to have higher scores on some of these than others, that could be as a result of them having had a life that has required them to do a lot of adapting. Oftentimes we see with this tool that people who've experienced a lot of adversity in their life are those who have had the opportunity to really hone and develop these skills. It's important to remember that depending on the type of change that you're facing, it could be that one or more of these characteristics or skills is going to be even more powerful than another. So that could be dependent on your role within the change itself or depending on the type of change. So what we're trying to help people do with a tool like this is to even these bars so that we have equal access to all 7 of the characteristics. And we've developed a flexibility to be able to draw on what will be most helpful to us and to the organization for this type of change. So I believe that coaching is all about asking good questions. So if we're taking a coaching stance towards these characteristics, I believe there's opportunity for us to coach others, coach each other, as well as coach ourselves in terms of the thinking that we bring to a particular change. A good coach is a good thinking partner. And so having those good open-ended questions that help to spark reflection, help to open up possibilities in our thinking, help to build commitment toward perhaps a different way, help to build confidence towards perhaps a different way. And ultimately, if we ask ourselves different questions during times of continuous change, we can begin to almost rewire how we respond and how we think about the changes that may be facing us. So I'm going to go through each of these and offer up for you some ideas around what could be some coaching questions that a leader or a peer, or if we want to talk to ourselves, that we could ask to help cultivate use of that particular resilience characteristic. And so we'll look at each one in turn, and I'd love, as you're listening along to this, for you to be thinking about some questions for each of them as well. So if we look at the first one of positivity, that's again the ability to see possibilities and the tendency to see possibilities and hope in a challenging situation. So imagine a change that you're facing right now that maybe you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable about. So I'd invite you to ponder, what are some new opportunities that this change might bring for you or bring for us as a team? What could be good about this change? What are the benefits that could come from it? And so taking the time to stop and think about that before we go to all the downsides can help us cultivate that characteristic. The second one is confidence. So how much do we retreat versus step in to change possibilities? How can we apply our strengths to this challenge? Which of your strengths is going to help you most here? Which of your skills will help you most here? All of those questions might help a person to go into exploring how they can do it versus why they can't. The next one is priorities. And so with priorities, again, it's that tendency to either be really scattered and say yes to everything versus an ability to really be clear on what are the overall main goals and how am I going to get there. So these could be a couple of questions that would help us with that one. What are the top 2 things you need to focus on to make good progress with this? What might you have to say no to or stop doing? So often I think we have this belief that we have to keep adding and adding. And I think during times of continuous change, we also have to ask, what are we going to take away or what do we need to unlearn? The next one is creativity. And so these are some questions that we might use for that one. How might we, and then fill in the blank in terms of the specific change. What are some different ways we could approach this? Let's come up with a bunch of ideas. Challenging yourself, if creativity isn't a high one for you, challenging yourself to say, okay, I'm going to come up with 15 to 20 different ways to do this. And then I'll evaluate them. So separating that evaluation stage from the creativity stage. The next one is connection. So how much do we try to go it alone versus asking for help and support? So figuring out with the person, getting them to think through what kind of support would help you. What resources do you need? Who might you ask? Who else could we involve? Structure is all around creating a plan, an organization for getting from where we are now to where we need to be with this change. And so here are some questions you could ask yourself about this. What are some steps I'm going to need to take? In what order should I be doing that? What's my plan for the next 2 weeks around doing what I need to for this change? Or what's my plan for today? What are the few next things that are going to help me move forward on this? And then the last one, as we said, is experimenting around taking action when there's uncertainty. So a few questions here. What could we try? What's a small step we might start with? What's the best case and worst case scenario for this? To be maybe a little more realistic at assessing risk associated with it versus letting the perceived risk or ambiguity stop us in our tracks. So those are some that are specific to each of the characteristics that can potentially help us to be more holistic in how we're looking at the changes that we are facing. Because we all know that there are times when, that one next change is the straw that breaks the camel's back, or adding it on is just, you're feeling like it's a little too much. So, so as you think about a change that maybe you're feeling a little uncertain about or uncomfortable with, I'm going to offer up just a few more questions around, not necessarily related to each of the characteristics one by one, but general change coaching questions that you can use with yourself and others and apply to a current change. So here they are. What are your personal goals for this change? So that gets to that personalized side of it, and also helps a person to identify some of the priorities. What's a current strength you can use? What might you need to learn to do differently? So again, that could generate some priorities for the person. What might you need to stop doing in order to be successful in this change? What are some new habits that you might want to develop in order to be successful with this change? And what kind of support might you need? And of course, moving a person into some action, what are the most important next steps you can take? So the resilience characteristics can be thought of as a problem-solving model as well. And if you work your way through each of them, it can help you to figure out what control you can take in the situation and what you want to do to keep yourself moving through the change. So I would invite you as we wrap up on the formal piece of this and wait for some good questions from you, to be thinking about what are your change realities right now. What are some of your superpowers when it comes to resilience, and what are your opportunity areas? And what are some things that you might want to focus on to continue to strengthen, to continue to help your teams and your organization to feel confident and successful, and to be successful during times of continuous change. So I'm not sure, Kevin, if we've received any questions yet into the chat panel, but I'm going to turn it over to you to lead us further from here.
Great, thank you very much, Carolynne. Okay, I have a request for those attending the call. Please type your questions into the chat window on the web interface. Type your questions into the chat window, and we'll get them addressed by Carolynne. So thank you very much. So first one, we have a question from Kapil. Some people can deal with change better than others. Is resilience also impacted by personality types, or is it more individualized?
Great, thanks so much, Kapil, for that question. I would say, I would make two comments around that. I believe that we have some natural tendencies based on our personality types. And so I think there's some influence there for sure. And secondly, though, I also believe that the more we're in a position or a situation that requires us to deal with adversity, the better we get at building our resilience. So we become more resilient by virtue of the life experiences that we have. And with that said, I think that we can almost look for opportunities to challenge ourselves and to stretch ourselves out of our natural personality type into things that maybe feel a little scratchy or uncomfortable for us. All of these skills are developable, if that's a word, learnable. And so I think it's a combination, and I think intention helps us to get better at any of them.
Very good. Please enter your questions into the chat window. We had a related question from Shireen. I believe that's a she. She asks, do scores for the 7 resilience characteristics change if I look at my work versus personal life? She says, such as my Myers-Briggs type changes when I'm at work and at home.
Oh, great question, Shireen. So typically, no, it won't. So what happens is, though, it can change over time. So when a person takes the test or answers the questions in the resilience survey, it's going to be a measure of their resilience at that point in time. So if a person's been having like a really challenging couple of months, that can actually impact how their scores show up. The good news about that is that knowing where they are right now with those resilience scores allows them to develop a plan and put in place some additional actions they can take to strengthen the ones that come up lower. So people will, with this tool, change over time, unlike the personality ones that suggest that people maintain a fair degree of stability over time.
Very good. Another question here from Omar. Some changes are good though. Does resilience only apply to changes we see as negative?
No, that's a good question as well. So resilience applies to all changes, and I agree, some changes are good and many changes are good actually. With the resilience characteristic though, so if we just think of the first one as an example, positivity, someone who has a score higher in positivity is more likely to see many changes as good. Someone with a lower score in that one is more likely to see the potential negative of many changes. So all of the tools and skills of resilience can be applied, but the amount of energy a person has toward actually using them will be measured by the scores that they get on the resilience. So you're right, all changes are good, and these characteristics can be useful for both good and, in quotation marks, bad change.
Okay, very good. We have a question here from Judd. Can you do an organization level resilience profile as part of developing a change management plan to figure out what will be the problems or resistance points when introducing change?
So, yes, we have the capability to group the scores. Often the way in which we do that is by doing it more like a team-based or division-based score, because when we look at accountability for change and we look at the leadership structure, that helps to make it more actionable. And so, yeah, absolutely, we can explore it and use it as a way to help with change plans for sure.
Okay, excellent. Please enter your questions in the question window. We're approaching the top of the hour here. We do have a question here from Ronald, who asks, will there be polling questions?
Oh, that question probably came earlier in the webinar, perhaps. So no, we didn't incorporate any polling questions in this webinar today.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Maybe we have time for one more quick one. Going once, twice. Okay, I think we'll have to wrap it up here. Thank you very much, Carolynne, for an excellent presentation. I personally learned a lot from it. Everyone, I'd like you to be aware that you are able to claim professional development credits for this, and we will send out an email with details for everybody who was on this call. And we will be posting some information on that when this video does get posted to YouTube on how to claim those as well. This is part of a series of webinars that we run regularly throughout the year. The next one is actually tomorrow at noon, which is an interview on the new with two authors on the new vision for a product owner and how this new vision for product ownership affects how we plan and manage projects. That's the next one coming tomorrow, February 25th. And then we have more spread throughout the year. Please go to procept.com, that's P-R-O-C-E-P-T, procept.com, and look on the event calendar for listings of the upcoming webinars. Thank you very much, Carolynne. It was great.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks for the great questions as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.